All right, today we're tackling a big one. We're going back to 1774 to look at a novel that was so revolutionary, so controversial. It didn't just make waves, it literally changed the world. We're talking about Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther.
So, can a book be dangerous? It sounds a little dramatic, right? But with this book, it's the only question that matters. Because what happened after Werther was published, well, it wasn't just fiction anymore. The consequences were very real, and honestly, pretty alarming.
Yeah, before we even touch on the story itself, you've got to get a sense of the sheer impact this thing had. I mean, when it was published in 1774, it didn't just sell a few copies. No, it unleashed this cultural phenomenon. They called it Werther fever, and it swept across Europe. This was way bigger than just a book.
So, let's talk about the man at the center of this storm, Werther. He wasn't just some character in a story. He was something new, a kind of prototype for a whole new kind of hero. Think sensitive, tortured, and just overflowing with passion. He was the face of a new cultural movement brewing in Germany.
And that movement was called Sturm und Drang. It literally translates to storm and stress, which, that pretty much says it all, doesn't it? This was a full-on rebellion against the calm, cool, collected logic of the Enlightenment. It was all about raw, intense emotion and the power of the individual. And our guy Werther, he was basically the poster child.
But here's what makes this book so brilliant. Goethe isn't just putting emotion up on a pedestal. He's actually dissecting it like a scientist. He's asking this really critical question. What happens when your inner world, your feelings, become so overwhelmingly powerful that you start to lose your grip on everything else? On society, on reason, on reality itself.
So, what's the trigger for this breakdown? Well, as it so often is, it's love. But we're not talking about your typical sweet romance here. Oh no. Werther's love for a woman named Lot is unrequited, and it becomes this all-consuming fire that fuels his entire tragic story.
And you can actually watch his mental state crumble in stages. I mean, it starts out beautifully, right? He feels this divine inspiration from his love for Lot. But then, it sours. It curdles into this obsessive fixation that becomes like a sickness, just draining the life out of him until all that's left is this deep, profound despair.
Yeah, check out this quote. It calls his passion a wasting illness, and that's exactly what it is. It's not a strength, it's a disease that just eats away at everything, his art, his ability to think straight, and eventually his sanity. By the end, the man we met at the beginning is just gone. This love, for him, is a totally destructive force.
And this internal struggle inside Werther? It's really a stand-in for one of the biggest philosophical battles of the entire 18th century. Goethe basically puts it on stage for us. It's the ultimate showdown. Emotion versus reason.
And in this battle, you've got two champions. In one corner, you have Werther, our man of sensibility, who runs on pure instinct and emotion. And in the other corner, you've got Albert, who happens to be Lot's fiancé. He's the man of reason, stable, logical, a perfect product of the Enlightenment. They could not be more different.
And if you want to see just how deep this divide runs, look no further than how they talk about suicide. For Albert, it's simple. It's a weakness, a moral failing. End of story. But for Werther, it's a legitimate release from pain that's become just unendurable. And you can see right away, these aren't just academic debates. These ideas have actual life or death consequences. But this is where Goethe's genius really shines. He doesn't just say Team Werther or Team Albert. He shows us the danger in both extremes. Werther's tragic end is a clear warning that passion without any reason leads to total self-destruction. But a look at Albert suggests that a life of pure reason with no passion, well, that's just a cold, sterile, empty way to live. So the book is really a cautionary tale about going too far in either direction.
Okay, so that's the war going on inside Werther's head. But that's only half the story. You absolutely cannot understand his tragedy without looking at his battles with the outside world, his complete and total alienation from the rigid society of his time.
The guy is just trapped. He's stuck between worlds. He's a middle-class intellectual, so he's disgusted by what he calls the glittering misery of the aristocrats. But they look down on him and humiliate him for not following their rules. At the same time, he kind of idealizes the simple life of the peasants, but he can't actually join them. He just doesn't fit in anywhere.
And this is a really key point. His isolation from society isn't just some minor detail. It's what makes his total psychological collapse possible. Think about it. Once he's cut off from every social connection, from every anchor to the real world, there's absolutely nothing left to stop that internal obsession from just spiraling completely out of control.
So when you feel that alone, where do you turn? For a romantic like Werther, the answer is nature. But here's the thing. In this novel, nature isn't just a pretty setting. It's a mirror. It's a perfect reflection of whatever's going on inside his head.
And Goethe uses the changing seasons to show us this so brilliantly. The book kicks off in spring, and everything is bursting with life, just like Werther's initial joy. Then, as his obsession heats up through the summer, the world around him feels more intense. And, you guessed it, by the time we get to the bleak autumn and winter, the landscape is just as desolate and hopeless as he is.
Basically, his internal feelings become so powerful that they literally change how he sees the world. That beautiful nature that once gave him comfort, it transforms into this inescapable echo of his own suffering. Everywhere he looks, he just sees his own pain reflected back at him. It's an absolutely masterful literary move.
All right, so let's bring this all back to where we started, the book's absolutely shocking real-world legacy. Because now that we've gone deep into Werther's intense psychology, it starts to make a lot more sense why this story had such an explosive impact when it was released.
First off, there was a literal fashion trend. You had young men all across Europe suddenly walking around in Werther's signature outfit, a blue coat and a yellow waistcoat. I mean, people weren't just reading this book, they were living it. It became a whole identity.
But then, things took a much, much darker turn. The novel was actually blamed for a wave of copycat suicides. Young men identified so deeply with Werther's suffering that they followed him to the very same tragic end. This was so widespread, so alarming, that it gave birth to a term sociologists still use today, the Werther effect. It describes this exact phenomenon, a spike in suicides after a widely publicized one.
So, after all that, what's the big takeaway? The Sorrows of Young Werther is so much more than just a sad love story. It's this timeless, incredibly powerful look at individualism, at the real dangers of obsession, and at that fundamental human struggle, right? The often tragic difficulty of trying to reconcile who we are on the inside with the world on the outside.
And that really leaves us with one last question to think about. Werther's world was one of handwritten letters and rigid social circles. But what about ours? In an age of social media, where we're all curating our own identities online, how do we balance our authentic, messy, real feelings with the need for self-preservation? It's a question that's more relevant now than ever. Something to chew on. Thanks for joining me.